Hello and welcome to the iGaming Next podcast. Today with us, Scott Dodson, CMO of Hero Gaming. How's it going, Scott?
It's going well. Thanks very much, Pierre.
Good to hear. So, Scott, you're the CMO of Hero Gaming. Very interesting job. You come from a completely different industry. I would love for you just to introduce yourself a little bit, who you are and your background, especially. It's really interesting.
Sure. So I've spent a lot of time in startups. I started my first company in 1994. That was, bootstrapped in the advertising marketing business, but then raised a bunch of money for various startups in the game space. Did fintech company, gamification of fintech, ended up moving to London, worked for Gamesys for a couple of years. So that was my first stint in iGaming, 2013 to 2015. And then spent the last 5 years working for a language learning company, of all things, out of Estonia. So I think a pretty diverse background with only about less than 2.5 years in iGaming, but a lot of time spent in tech companies and mostly B2C and mentoring other companies.
Yeah, thank you. And it's fantastic to do this podcast today, actually, Scott, because I think sometimes in our little iGaming bubble, we tend to be a little bit isolated. So having someone like you coming with a fresh perspective of the industry and kind of comparing it to the wider tech industry that you come from is going to be really interesting today, actually. So the topic of today is growth marketing brain droppings, basically. But before we go into this topic, I have a question for you, actually, because I watched your presentation during the iGaming Next Power Hour the other week, which was fantastic, by the way. If anyone wants to see that presentation, which I highly recommend, go on YouTube, Scott Dodson, iGaming Next, and that presentation will show up. There's some really good tips and tricks there. But I have a question on that note, because in the beginning of that presentation. Yeah, you know where this is going. In the beginning of that presentation, you laid out a little bit of a humble brag, as they call it these days, which is the fact that you said that you had touched Bill Gates' naked belly on multiple occasions.
This is true.
Yeah. This is true. So I would like to start to ask you, obviously, can you please elaborate on this fantastically intriguing question?
Sure. So in the early part of my career, I moved to Seattle. I spent basically 22 years in Seattle. And in the early part of my career, I was in film and video production and did a lot of work for Microsoft Studios. And this is in the real early kind of growth stages of Microsoft, and Microsoft did a tremendous amount of internal communications. And I will say this is kind of where I learned closest thing to my kind of MBA, frankly, was listening to, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer and Jeff Rakes and all of the executives who really kind of were responsible for the meteoric growth of Microsoft on a daily basis as a humble audio guy, actually. So that was my role. So I was just a sound engineer and I would record their stuff, but that also involved many times miking up Bill. So you'd have to basically, you'd have to run a microphone up his shirt, basically. And so Bill and I were, very intimate for a number of years there.
Okay, fair enough. So how would you describe his belly?
How would I describe what? I'm sorry.
How would you describe his belly?
I can't give any recent updates, unfortunately.
Okay.
But yeah, no. But he was a great attitude. Yeah, and it's a very surreal experience, I have to say. Like there would be times when we'd be backstage, before one of these presentations. It would be a live kind of show to the rest of the company, and the company was fairly sizable at this point. And we'd be backstage and crammed into a space, literally, where you're basically completely on top of each other. Couldn't have done this in COVID, right? You're just basically breathing each other's air, and you have to be totally silent because there's like somebody else on stage and they're going to call them out here, and you're just hanging out there for like it's just the weirdest thing. You imagine standing next to somebody like Bill Gates for like 10 minutes, can't talk to him, just you're just hanging out, right? So anyway,
Great start of this podcast. I don't know how we're gonna accelerate from this. I mean, this is gonna be downhill, but we'll try. We'll try our best. We'll start on a big note. Okay, so thanks for elaborating on that, Scott. I have been losing sleep over this, so so now I can be at peace again. Okay, I want to start actually by heading into the subject of just like marketing trends in general. I mean, like again, you have different perspectives on this. I mean, coming from the wider tech, and perhaps this ties in a little bit with marketing trends in general. I mean, something that is widely discussed now that I think is interesting for the iGaming industry is kind of people's attention spans. How and why is that changing, and so forth. So I'd like to ask by starting you, like, how are you adjusting to these trends as you see, and how are you researching these trends and understanding where they're going and so forth, in general, tying that into like your position with Hero Gaming?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a big question. There's a bunch of different ways I could go into it. I think maybe one of the more interesting ones is if you think about marketing channels over time. You know, the marketing, like the biggest marketing channels of today were not the biggest marketing channels 10 years ago, and the biggest marketing channels 10 years ago were not the biggest marketing channels 10 years before that. And that makes for a very volatile and a very difficult landscape, right? And there's a dynamic to these channels, which is that let's take Facebook. When I joined Facebook in 2007, it would be a pretty terrible marketing channel to use. Right, there were not nearly the number of people on it. The tools that were available to marketers were really pretty crude and rudimentary, and you were not going to get a very good ROI from this. And then, so imagine basically an S curve, right, where you've got this, and I guess I'm backwards on the camera. Let's see if I can do it this way. So, anyway, yeah. So if this is your S curve, so back in 2007, it was at the bottom of this curve, and you weren't really going to be able to get much ROI out of it. And then it went through this crazy inflection point, right? And it started to grow, and they started to build tools at the same time. And there was a period of time where you could get amazing ROI out of Facebook. And then once you start to do that, everybody starts doing the same thing, and they jump onto the platform. And so obviously the ROI starts to decline again, and you lose that kind of golden age. And then you can still get an ROI out of Facebook, but it's not like the 10x or 100x that you might have gotten during its inflection point. And so you've got to have, I think, there's a few pieces to it. You have to be capable and competent on the marketing channels of the era and the marketing channels of the last era, I would say, or the last decade, because that's probably where 60-70% of your spend is going to be, maybe even more. But then you've also got to invest in some channels that are emerging, or that are off the beaten path. I remember and I think there's a lot of different creative ways to do this. One is, if you think about, at the end of the day, marketing is consumer acquisition, right? It's customer acquisition. And so you want to think about who you're selling to and what are you selling them, and what type of people, are going to be interested in that. And, I credit actually Gamesys back in whenever it was, when I was there, 2013, they thought about that problem, and they went, well, what other types of people are kind of have a similar experience to online gamblers? There's a really, really sharp guy who's still there named Robeson, who occurred to him. He went, well, what about eBay? The experience of winning an auction on eBay or bidding at that last minute gives you some of the same entertainment value. In fact, the real active eBay users really get a tremendous amount of like intrinsic motivation, a lot of entertainment value out of the experience. And so they went into, you started using eBay as a channel when nobody else was doing it, and it just happened to be then a perfect kind of inflection point, right? They were able to get really good ROI out of that. And then of course, everybody noticed what they were doing over time and figured out how to use the platform, and and then there's the ROIs in town. So I think in some ways, so at the time, eBay was not a new platform. right? I think we're always looking to kind of find what's the new platform. Is it TikTok? Is it, is it whatever's kind of coming, Twitch, whatever. But I think there's also something to be said for, if you start with what are you selling and who are you selling to, and who's going to resonate with your product, then, and not like, how are you going to trick somebody into trying you or something like that, then I think some of these ideas emerge, and you can find some gold in some channels. But I think this is, the bottom line is you've still got to be good at that kind of the core piece, that 70-80% that is the mature channels that are working, and you've got to figure out how to drive ROI there. Then you've got to figure out, okay, what's the 20% of these emerging channels, or some experiments with some channels that maybe have been overlooked or forgotten about, and then 10% on kind of wild experiments that are completely unproven, right? And you're probably going to fail, but you may get some return.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, iGaming is also one of these markets which is heavily regulated. The regulations look different in different markets. How would you say, like, how much does the marketing channels differ between various markets?
Yeah, I mean, a lot, for sure, quite a bit. And the landscape's actually changed considerably since I was at Gamesys. I think people will probably like to hear this. We can feel a little bit vindicated and validated, but the level of regulation, we thought it was fairly aggressive then, and complained about people going to, we could see kind of people operating outside of regulations, and we're kind of frustrated by that, that the regulators were giving us such a hard time when they weren't giving those folks a hard time. And but the reality is you don't, it's like a frog, boiling a frog. You've heard that analogy, right? Where if you raise the water temperature slowly, you don't notice it. I mean, me coming back after 5 years, I honestly, it's making my head spin a little bit, right? Because it's way more aggressive than it was even 5 years ago, right? So yeah, I'm guessing that there's not a lot of regulators who are going to be listening to this podcast, but I think that yeah. Anyway, I think the pendulum has hopefully swung as far as it's going to go, and people will kind of some degree of sanity will come back. Now, how does that impact marketing? I mean, I think I'd say it's a similar thing. We have to be really, really good in the markets that are fully regulated, right? And you have to be just very much on your game, because you're not going to make massive margins, right? CPAs are going to be high, but you have to figure out a way to get an ROI, right? You have to figure out a way to increase player value compared to user acquisition costs, and there's a bunch of ways to do that. I mean, obviously, you can lower CPA, you can raise LTV, and it's not. I think one thing that's very important is it's not. You can't just look at it as these giant buckets of customer acquisition cost and. We can't get on the camera here. Yeah, CPA and LTV. You really have to look at it very, very, I think like a surgeon, because if you have 10 players and all their value, the value of all the 10 players is 5, right? Then you have an LTV of 5, and if your CPA is 4, then great, you could make a little bit of money. But the reality is that the players aren't all 5s. Right? There's 2 2s, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 9, and a 10, right? And that's different for every market. I think I'm not saying that these are like massive high rollers necessarily. They could be people that retain for 2 years or 3 years, or just really, really get a lot of value out of the product and stick around for a long period of time. But so you need, I think, a very robust attribution stack, right? That lets you understand what value proposition, what USP are you selling on one end, through what channel, right, to acquire what customer, who then behaves in what way on the early part of your funnel and in the later stages of your product. And if you're kind of looking at it all lumped together, you're gonna go, oh well, we can't make any money in this market, or something like that, right? But if you and in a minute, maybe if we get to it, I'll kind of I'll give you the kind of the exception to this whole strategy. But I think this is really the key. Is we have the tools now. I think a modern marketer needs to be able to be supported by the organization, to have the tools, to be able to have this level of sophistication, right? To be able to say, and this is something that I alluded to it. I guess we talked a little bit in the talk that you were talking about. But I come from a language learning app where the LTV is about €90, right? So the total lifetime value of a player net to us was about €90, and so you think about that, and you think about what do your CPAs have to be? They've got to be really, really low, or you've got to basically be able to find players that are worth a lot more than €90, right? Players who, in our case, bought a lifetime subscription right out of the gate, and just went, yeah, here's €200. I love this product. You've given me the great, onboarding experience. You've essentially activated me. If you've shown me the value of the product, I've gotten into a rhythm. So I know, I'd use it twice a week or whatever, 4 times a week. And so this is going to give me value. And then when they hit the paywall and it's time, they go, yeah, here's a year's subscription. And we had to figure out, how do we reach those players and how do we convert them? Much more so than just trying to work with the average LTV. Sorry, I don't know. Hopefully that lands. Maybe it's a little bit. Now I've forgotten what the question was in the first place. Regulations. Yeah, there we go. Took it all over the place. So I mean, I think then right. I mean, we're like most. So people with an MGA license, we're operating in countries, that don't have a regulated system yet, right? And it does limit you, obviously, but you have to figure out ways to do it. And I think that's one of the things that I haven't, to be honest. If I had all the answers, I would. Well, I don't know if I'd share them. I don't know if my CEO would want me to share them. But no. But if I had all those answers, I would at least try and share them. But but I do believe that we need to. Affiliates, we have a love-hate relationship, right? I mean, critical to the business, and great affiliates are absolutely fantastic at driving business. But I think we need to come up with ways that we can reach players outside of that ecosystem. We need to come up with ways that I think that players can generate other players, right? And be better. I think the industry is fairly lazy about measuring the impact of kind of word of mouth or organic kind of halo, as we put it in my last company.
This is what you talked about in your talk about growth loops. It ties together to that, I presume.
I think so. And I think it ties in.
How would you create a generic growth loop for acquisition, for example, in gaming?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the core growth loop in an iGaming company is a paid advertising loop, right? So this is where if you have low enough CPA, high enough LTV, then you just essentially reinvest that money until it starts to decline. But what's, I think. And so everybody goes, oh, okay, well, that's what he's talking about. But I think if you can add any other loop, like if you can add an incremental loop where, for whatever reason, people tell their friends about it, even in a very informal way, just you drive a good enough product experience that people go, wow, that's really cool. Or, hey, these guys have something that's actually better, or than something else that we're used to, and you get a little bit of that, then that's essentially extra, however you want to look at it. It's either lower CPA, or because you're getting more people, you're getting another 10%, let's just say, or 15% or 20%, or it's higher LTV if you want to attribute the new people, the new players that come in based on that, to the players that gave that kind of word of mouth referral. And I think this is really where there's, what I've seen is that this stuff, it just becomes very multiplicative, right? So if you can, for every loop that you can layer on top, then or kind of add into this paid advertising loop, you get a lot more mileage out of the paid advertising loop.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, just hanging on to the regulatory question a little bit longer. I mean, for you as the CMO, it must be it must be quite time consuming for you to make sure that you stay compliant in your marketing, I would imagine, because there's been fines obviously for some operators who have made like some tiny mistake in the Swedish market, phrased a sentence in the not correct way, or by mistake offered a bonus, and all of a sudden you're slapped with huge fines. Is this something that is kind of a bottleneck operating an operator today?
And I mean, this sounds like a not a humble brag, but luckily this hasn't been a big problem for me. I think at least because I think we're pretty seasoned in the Swedish market, and we've got a really strong, not only kind of marketing leader there, but content team that are seasoned. They've been in the business for a long time. We've had some real stability in those positions, in those roles. They know the drill. And I think in general, the company tends to be a little risk adverse. I think it shows up in interesting ways. I mean, I think we're being very careful. We canceled a very modest company event in light of some of the COVID kind of changes lately, which I think would have been fully compliant, but we just went, it's just not worth the risk, right? And I think this is our attitude has been in Sweden. We've actually, I think, we've really made an effort starting long before my time to really color within the lines there. And so, and I think it's one of the things that attracted me, frankly, because I think this is what you have to do. You have to use the fact that you're a regulated operator, a regulated market to your advantage. You have to basically go, okay, we need to not just color within the lines, but leave a little extra space within those lines, so that if things move, we can still operate, and we actually are not in a mad scramble. Because I think otherwise it ends up being a bit of a race to the bottom, right? If you start to do poorly and you're the wolf is at the door financially, then that's when you take chances, and then you start to So that part I think has been really lucky for us, I guess, that we're
okay. Yeah, I mean, Sweden is one market, obviously, but especially in these times now with COVID, as you mentioned, the regulations keep changing by the day, especially in the advertisement side. I mean, some bigger changes, some smaller changes. In Spain, they are now banning advertisement for sports team. And I saw just like a couple of days before they announced that, or after they announced that, there was Betson announced just before that they are sponsoring the football team of Ibiza, for example. A pretty horrible timing for them, obviously. But so this is what I mean a little bit, that like each market has its own challenges, and each market is changing rapidly. I mean, how do you stay on top of these changes as in the marketing department?
Yeah,
it must be so many different restrictions to keep track of. I mean,
there are. But I think, I guess that's, to some extent, that's what an affiliate first strategy also insulates you from a little bit, right? And again, I'm going to give credit to our ops team and especially our legal team. I think that we just have pretty strong communications. I mean, I think it could be much more complicated for many operators, but for us, we've had a lot of focus on Sweden, so we really understand that market and understand how those regulations have impacted us. I mean, I think we're obviously keeping our eye on other parts of Europe that were are under the MGA license. I mean, this is, I think, where it's the most volatile right now, right? Things that are kind of happening potentially in Germany. We're not in Spain, so it's easy. We're not in Italy, right? So maybe we're a little simpler than most. Thank God. Because so unfortunately I don't have a lot to add there. I mean, this is I understand, like it's clearly regulations are super important, but it's I kind of, it's not my forte, and thankfully we have enough kind of strength in the team that it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, fair enough. Taking a little bit step back, Scott, now on an overview and kind of more philosophical view of marketing in general. I mean, back up like 20 years or something like that, and it was a lot more difficult to to measure your marketing campaigns than it is today. It seems to me that marketing is highly data-driven today, and the ROI is kind of the only thing which matters in some sense, and data-driven decision is important, of course. But does this mean that the traditional creative marketer is dead?
Yeah, I don't think so at all. There's two ways to answer that. One is I'll talk about digital specifically, and the role of creative in digital, and then the second one is just kind of digital in the landscape of all possible marketing. So my last company, I'd say 90% of our spend was digital. I mean, maybe even higher in some cases. We basically did digital and then experiments, one-off experiments, and actually many of those were digital. That said, and we were able over a 2-year period to increase our ROAS. So ROAS is what we measured, which was the return on acquisition spend, which is basically the value of the first purchase that somebody made compared to the acquisition cost. And we had it very, very, by campaign, by cohort, just to the day, right? We would look at these numbers. And we drove, my team drove a 6% month-on-month cumulative, so like compound interest increase in ROAS over 2 years, the last 2 years, and that I was there. And 50% of that, at least, was due to creative, right? Better creative. So you think that, oh, a banner is a banner, but the way that you it's just, you think about, like you were kind of alluding to, the short attention span. You've got to be able to capture somebody's attention and maybe even capture somebody's imagination. Again, playing within the rules of regulation, and so that makes it even harder. But constraints actually are sometimes the greatest inspiration for creativity, and it's limits sometimes that actually make you to drive innovation. So I'm convinced that even in the very highly measured digital realm, creative plays a huge role. And then if you step back, and I think I might have said this, forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but human beings have a neuroses to know things, and we love certainty, or as much certainty, and data has become kind of the new religion, right? Every company wants to say that it's data driven, and the reality is that it's 9 times out of 10 it is a lot more complex, and usually people frankly just use the data to confirm their biases, right? To confirm the decision that they've already made.
Tweak it in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
To make the data work for them. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but nonetheless, because of that, digital has seen this massive growth, right? It's why the biggest channels in the world right now are Google and Facebook, and then plenty of other digital channels, and how critical SEM is and all that. So all that stuff is great, but what I'm also a believer that wherever there is so it's just, everything's on a supply and demand. Like it becomes really obvious in digital because everybody's bidding on the same inventory essentially, and so if you can find things that people aren't bidding on, it's cheaper, etc. But the reality is that if you step back, the same is true for all other marketing. It's just that right now, lots and lots of people are bidding on digital. Right. So the value actually of a lot of these other channels, I think there's some bargain shopping to be made. Now they're harder to use, because now we've got the last 10 years of marketeers have actually been working really hard to skill themselves up on digital, and people that are good at radio, right, are dinosaurs, right? Yeah. But the same, but there is a lot of potential, I think, in those channels, right? And so I think, and you have to think about it too. Channels like TV, radio, out of home, they don't work just as acquisition channels, right? Or they're not really acquisition channels. They're mostly brand channels, and you have to understand how to work with brand. But they also work as CRM, if you think about it, right? So I've I've tried a new casino and I liked it, and then I see another TV ad. That's a reminder to come back, right? As much as it is an acquisition channel. So not only is it making my CPAs on my SEM, on my search engine marketing lower, because people are, when they see the brand advertised, like, oh yeah, I saw that ad, that was great. But on the other end, right, they're also essentially, it's raising the LTVs because they're playing more, right?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, talking about the different channels, traditionally, I have a question for you, just as on on an outside point of view from marketing perspective. But traditionally, SEO has been huge. Obviously, a lot of investment goes into that. But now, as there are more and more channels popping up, social media, YouTube, all the things, is SEO becoming less and less important, would you say? And where are the trends heading when it comes to the channels?
I'll make a distinction between kind of SEO and SEM. I think they're easy to kind of to convolute. So, SEO, I mean, just for your viewers, right? For people who aren't in marketing, perhaps. So SEO is, you search for, online sportsbook or something, and the first organic search that comes up is essentially SEO, right? That company or that affiliate has done really good work to essentially convince Google that it has the most authoritative content on that subject, and there it is. So SEO is very difficult, and it's a very long road. It takes a lot of investment, and you have to kind of choose your battles. It's a very like hedgerow by hedgerow kind of game. You find these kind of long tail keywords where you don't think there's a lot of competition, and you're not going to rank on online casino out of the gate, right? No. Unless you're a huge brand that has existed for a long time and has already built that credibility as far as Google is concerned. So anyway, and then SEM is basically like, okay, now when I search for online sportsbook, you're buying an ad, right? That sits right there. So, and again, the effectiveness of both of those, like the click-through rates, and the kind of conversion rates on SEM are given a lot by the other types of marketing that you're doing. If you're doing a fair bit of above the line, TV, radio, out of home, if you're doing a fair bit of digital, that's really designed to kind of put a positive brand impression in people's heads, then when they hit those ads, they're going to convert better. But the ads themselves, I mean, I think if you go through it, it's just every marketer kind of, their playbook is, everybody I can retarget, I want to retarget. I'm going to spend as much money as I can on retargeting. Every dollar or euro I can spend on SEM that's effective, I probably want to spend on search engine marketing, because this represents intent by the user, right? They're searching for your product, so you'd love to be there in front of them, and it's just a matter of, am I willing to pay enough to be there, right? So you have to kind of make that calculation. I think beyond that is where it gets really interesting. Then it becomes the Wild West, right? Because you're essentially trying to either generate intent in somebody who might not have it, right? Or capture interest, on the fly. I'm browsing through Instagram, and all of a sudden some ad catches my attention, and I think, gosh, yeah, I'd like to make a bet on that or whatever, right? I think this is where this is where I think the headroom lives in terms of creative, right? And for creative marketers. And once again, what was the question? Did I answer it? Did I come close?
No, I just we were just coming back to marketing channels. So it's good in general. Like I said, it seems to me that I mean, as we look forward into the future, of kind of how to capture people's attention and how to reach out to these products. I wanted to also ask you, kind of slugging into content marketing, which is essentially what we are doing now with of the future mediums, the podcasts and these other things which are growing rapidly. Not only podcasts, but just content creation in general is obviously something that the next generation is being raised with. TikTok being one of these mediums, and the video seems to become more and more important in today's social media and content consuming world. if we look at these type of mediums specifically, is this something that you have thoughts on in general? How to break into those type of mediums, like creating content and gaining people's interests?
So yeah, I mean, I think, I doubt I'm going to say anything super authoritative to anybody that's already in this, but obviously, let's say things like Twitch and other streaming platforms and TikTok. These are these channels which are kind of in the early stages, right? I'd say they haven't hit their kind of golden era of 10x return. I mean, for some people, TikTok already has and streamers already have, but I think it's a little bit more industry specific. And I think the thing is to look at is, okay, what's even beyond that, right? What are the next channels? But in terms of if you kind of take your larger question of content in general, I think content marketing is absolutely key, right? And this gets to two things. One, it gets to just the changing nature of our market. As somebody who's the parent of teenagers, I can't even. I mean, it's extremely challenging to get my teenagers to sit down and watch any long form digital media, right? Like a movie, right? Or they're just they're interested. They're super interested though in short form or medium form YouTube and other kind of streamer type of content, and shorter forms than that, of course. And I think this is even though now those clearly aren't iGaming customers, but they will be, right, at some point. And so I think that people are, with the growth of content also comes the growth of content curation and content discovery, which I think those are, from a startup perspective, startup tech problem, those are very interesting problems to solve, but they are being kind of worked out over time. And it allows people, again, to self-segment and watch exactly what they want to watch from an authoritative source, right? And the algorithms get more human. So you can't fool Google for long. And you know what I'm saying? Like, your content has to be good. It has to actually be authoritative, or it won't win against other content, right? And it doesn't have to be authoritative to everyone, right? Like my teenagers would probably not want to watch this interview at all, right? but people in the industry hopefully find it extremely valuable and do, right?
Yeah, hopefully.
So
the dinosaurs. Yeah.
but I mean, I think this is the key, right? So if you're creating authentic content, over time, the algorithms, right, they find that content, right, because they just this is where AI is invisible, but it gets better and better and better, right? And I think for these types of, so then this is where you need that kind of level of sophistication that a digital marketer has, where you can go, what does this influencer or this content producer or this content producer or this content producer, what do the people that are listening to them, watching them, reading them, how do they behave in my product? Do they resonate with my product, right? And I think this is where it's difficult to do at scale, but you can essentially be your own AI. You find, if you find somebody and you go, those people, it's like the eBay example, right? These eBay users, these power users who are on eBay a lot and are exposed to these ads, they do really, really well in the online gaming product, and then you go, well, what else is like that, right? And you start to kind of, you kind of find, you experiment, and you go, here's one, right? Here's one that actually works. And now let's see, how do we broaden the shoulders of that, or how do we extrapolate in that direction?
Yeah, that's right. I think from my perspective, I think Twitch as a channel is it's such an interesting phenomenon, because before Twitch existed, I come from the esports world when I was younger, and back then, I mean, no one would have ever anticipated back then that people would actually spend a significant amount of time to watch others play. That was just not how we interacted back then. And I mean, you can attribute that to the internet capabilities weren't there for streaming at that time. But it was just not anticipated, let's say. And So Twitch comes along, completely changed the world of esports, which is now huge, of course. But I think the generations that we are from, Scotland, we kind of we kind of understand. We understand that medium. We understand that now that it works and so forth. What I'm alluding to is like when we then look further down the demographics into the younger segment, like Gen Z, and how they interact with TikTok, for example. That generation is so good at seeing through advertisements, let's say, like place advertisement. And I have a really fun example of this, actually, and a little bit of a story, which is I attended this like digital event called Collision, which is a massive tech conference in North America. And one of the talks, they hosted a content creator at TikTok. Okay, so his company, he's a 20-year-old CEO, and his company produces some of the biggest TikTok dances. Okay, I mean, sure, you have teenagers, so you're very familiar with that. One of the dances that he created was, for example, this. I don't know if you recognize. Some of the viewers might recognize it. I don't know. Yeah. But he created this dance. And like 50 million people did this dance. Okay, so they understand obviously how to create viral marketing for Gen Z. But his point in this discussion was that like when the older generation, i.e. us, when we try to do content marketing on TikTok, we fail.
Yep.
Because the younger generation sees through it. They are not interested in this type of content marketing anymore. So when we move into the future and this like very intelligent, let's say, demographic and generation grows up to become our customers, do you think it will be a lot more difficult to kind of capture their attention because TikTok is just one step? I mean, there will be more platforms like this. As obviously, this will develop.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, it's like everything comes full circle, right? I mean, back in the day, if you think about in the early days of television, what TV commercials were not direct response, right? There was never, you weren't actually, in many cases, I mean, in the early days, they were really clunky, but then TV commercials became kind of a form of entertainment, right? I mean, you think about the Super Bowl ads; they're not trying to sell you anything at all, right? But they're building brand affinity, right? And they're making you so that you go, okay, well, when I decide I want product X, I'm going to choose this brand because I can relate to it. They get me. I get them. They're willing to make fun of themselves. Whatever. They were authentic, right? I think that so in this regard, yeah, I think that the Gen Z is, they're a very serious generation. They're growing up in a really crappy time, right? I mean, can you imagine graduating from university like this year, right?
Oh my goodness!
It'd be a nightmare, right? And things weren't good before, right? I mean, like like in the U.S., you weren't, your chance of or the U.K., your chance of buying a house, is not the same. So they're very practical. They're very they kind of go, everything is just kind of BS, and so it has to be very authentic, right? And the one thing I think that cuts through is humor, right? I mean, they're just massive consumers of memes and massive creators of memes, and I think that's the other part of it is, you need brands that allow them to essentially take some ownership by repurposing and recreating, like letting people create memes out of your brand and things like that, making it kind of interactive and having a life of its own. So I hadn't seen this guy, and I'm no expert in TikTok by any stretch. And I've kind of looked at the products that I've been marketing are for generally older generations. So it's but I'm right on top of it with Twitch, and I think Twitch is a great example where it's just very authentic content, right? And if somebody it really relies on the person to sell something. If they're going to sell something, they either have to be playing the game and just being like having a great time, obviously, and then the game sells, right? Or they have to be kind of very self-aware about it and hey, look, I'm going to pitch this because whatever X, Y, and Z reason, and and you're going to respond to that. But if they try and, you can't be sneaky. You can't pretend like you're not going to, like you're going to pull the wool over somebody's eyes, right? It's fascinating though. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it is fascinating, and it feels very clearly like as we move along and as new mediums becomes available, the content is in the hands of the consumer more and more. Like they are the ones who are in control of what they see, obviously, and it's difficult to kind of force feed
and this is a key growth loop, right? If your customers are creating content that other customers are finding, right, then that's that's fantastic. And there's a number of ways to do that. I mean, this stuff is kind of it's under every rock. I mean, if you drive a great customer experience, a customer, like, let's just say customer support experience, right? Somebody has a problem, think about how many times, and then it gets resolved, like that's the kind of thing people share, right? Because they're used to shitty customer experiences, right? And when they actually have a good customer experience, then then that's worth huge. And I think that's worth huge value. And I think this is also an area where many of us could do a better job. Is we don't celebrate wins enough, right? In this industry. This gets a little bit, it's a weird kind of paradox, but anybody who's an operator, we're, the truth be told, we're not super happy when somebody wins a huge jackpot, unless it's like an accumulated jackpot that doesn't come out of our coffers, right? In which case we love it. But if it comes direct, right, we're like, but again, so I think that creates a mentality where we don't find ways to celebrate it as much, right? Where the reality is hey, this is like one of the unique values that we can deliver in this industry that nobody else can, right? Nobody else can do that. And this idea, this aspirational idea that, wow, this is actually possible, and oh my gosh, this is a real person, and I think really celebrating those wins and using those wins as content, right? And I think this is really the potential of, let's just say, Twitch, right? And potentially, who knows, potentially even TikTok have done the right way, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember back in the day, I used to work at Dodson, and I think at somewhere around 2013 or 2012, we had at that time the biggest winner of Mega Fortune. It was a huge bonus.
Cool.
At that time, it was the biggest ever payout in an online jackpot. It was like 12.7 million euro or something like that. And yes, when that happened, the entire company was like, oh my god, we need to immediately start generating PR, generating media through this, right? But and sure, it generates some media and these things, but you're right. I think it can be done a lot better. But this is a little bit the secret to Twitch as well, because people love to see when they actually win and they become happy and this sort of thing. It's a phenomenon,
Yeah. And what's great is that the creators know this, right? They you watch them and they clearly know that okay, this is an opportunity, and so they go over the top, right? And they really have some fun with it, right? And I think this is maybe the key. We get back to how do you this is maybe a problem to solve, but how do you get the person themselves, how do you get the player to create the content, right? Let's say even if they're not a Twitch streamer, but what if you gave players the opportunity to a platform that they could actually share it in a really profound way, right? That might be really cool. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, we've seen that in the gaming segment, that more and more you are enticed to show to share your screen as you are playing, right? Like share a live stream to Facebook and these other things. I don't know if that translates to gaming.
Maybe not yet.
Maybe not yet,
or maybe not in every market.
Yeah, exactly. But perhaps there is something there's something there to look at. Again, I mean, all these ideas, it's about throwing them on the wall, right? And then see what sticks in the end.
I mean, this is all that stuff in that 10%, right? But I think if it's just too easy, I think, to not do any of those things, because they, there's always going to be saying, oh, that's not going to work because of this, or nobody will ever share that, or whatever, right? So,
True. Scott, we are out of time today. It's been super interesting. I personally love this topic. I feel I can talk about this this for hours. The little notes I had next to me, we didn't even get a third of it, basically. So thank you for participating today. Really interesting. Whenever you want to do another one, I'm always here. So just let me know.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. And also thank you everyone who was tuning in today. Thanks to our sponsors, Pragmatic Solutions. And I wish you a really nice, good afternoon, Scott.
Thank you, Pierre. Thanks, everybody. Yeah.